What if, one ordinary day, a woman who has everything meets a man who believes he has nothing left, and together they discover the one thing they've both been missing? This is not just a love story, it's a story about second chances, about healing, and how sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change everything. If stories like this touch your heart, stories that remind us it's never too late to find love or rediscover yourself, then go ahead and hit subscribe. You won't want to miss the moments ahead. Now picture this, a small town, a quiet garage on the edge of Main Street, and one man, a man whose life has become nothing more than routines and repairs, until one rainy afternoon, a broken-down car, and the woman behind its wheel, change everything he thought he knew. Let's begin. Poor mechanic fixes woman's car for free, unaware she's a billionaire who'll change his life forever. James Walker wiped his grease-stained hands on an old rag, the familiar scent of motor oil clinging to the air like a forgotten memory. The soft hum of cicadas echoed in the distance, blending with the occasional clang of metal tools in his modest repair shop on the edge of town. It was late afternoon, the golden light casting long shadows across the cracked pavement outside. For 30 years, this shop had been his sanctuary. Here, bolts, engines and carburetors obeyed his steady hands, a place where things could be fixed, unlike life, which had a tendency to break and leave pieces scattered beyond repair. Since Margaret passed away 5 years ago, James had filled the silence with work. Customers came and went, cars rolled in and out, but none stayed long. Enough to notice the weight he carried. He didn't mind. People these days were in a hurry. He preferred the quiet hum of engines over small talk. That's when he heard it, the unmistakable sputter of an engine out of tune, followed by the soft crunch of tires slowing on gravel. He glanced up, expecting to see a familiar face from town. Instead, a sleek black convertible, foreign expensive, rolled to a stop just outside the shop. The glossy finish gleamed under the fading sun, completely out of place in this small, dust-covered corner of America. And then she stepped out. A tall woman, poised, with sharp features softened by a kind smile. She wore tailored slacks and a crisp white blouse, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. Her dark hair framed her face perfectly, though she brushed at it absently as the wind tugged strands loose. For a moment, James stood frozen, rag in hand, heart ticking oddly in his chest. She didn't belong here, that much was obvious, and yet there was something in her eyes, a flicker of weariness that felt oddly familiar. "Excuse me," she called, her voice smooth but tinged with frustration. "I think my car's having some trouble. The engine just gave out a mile back." James cleared his throat and stepped forward, wiping his hands once more before offering a nod. "Pop the hood," he said simply, gesturing toward the car. She obeyed, watching quietly as he leaned over the engine, his practiced eyes scanning the intricate machinery. It didn't take long for him to find the culprit. A loose belt, a minor misalignment, nothing unfixable. "You're lucky it didn't. Leave you stranded farther out," he muttered, reaching for his tools. "Give me 20 minutes and I'll have you back on the road." The woman gave a soft laugh, almost self-deprecating. "Lucky isn't exactly how I'd describe today." James glanced at her briefly but said nothing more. He worked in silence, focused and methodical, the way he'd always been. But as he tightened the last bolt, curiosity edged into his mind. What was someone like her doing alone, in a town most people barely pass through? When he finally closed the hood, she approached with a grateful smile, reaching into her handbag. "How much do I owe you?" James shook his head, wiping the sweat from his brow. "No charge, just needed a quick adjustment." Her brow furrowed slightly. "No charge? Are you sure?" He shrugged. "Some things aren't worth haggling over. You're back. On the road, that's enough. For a moment, she looked at him intently, as if trying to understand something deeper beneath his simple words. Then, to his surprise, she extended her hand. "I'm Lily Caldwell," she said, "and I insist on thanking you properly. Let me buy you dinner. At least, let me do that." James hesitated. It had been years since anyone invited him to dinner. Years. Since anyone even looked him in the eye with that kind of sincerity. His first instinct was to politely decline. But something in Lily's gaze, a mixture of determination and vulnerability, made him pause. He glanced at the empty garage, the sinking sun casting amber hues through the window panes, and thought of the cold, silent house waiting for him at the end of the day. Maybe tonight he didn't need to be alone. "All right," he said finally, wiping his hands clean one last time. "I know a place down the road, nothing fancy." Lily smiled, genuine and warm. "Perfect. I wasn't looking for fancy." As they walked toward her car, James caught himself wondering, not for the first time, how life had a strange way of surprising you. A woman like her, polished and successful, with the kind of car that turned heads, didn't usually cross paths with men like him. Yet here she was, offering something more valuable than any payment, her time, and for reasons he couldn't quite name, James found himself looking forward to that simple dinner more than he had looked forward to anything in years. James hadn't been to Marcy's diner in months. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, where the waitress could guess your order before you sat down, and the coffee tasted exactly the same every single day. Strong, no nonsense, dependable. Tonight, though, felt different. He held the door open as Lily stepped inside, the bell overhead jingling softly. The regulars at the counter paused mid-bite, their conversations dipping just enough to sneak glances at the unfamiliar woman walking beside James. She stood out effortlessly, her tailored clothes, polished demeanor, the quiet grace in the way. She scanned the room. "Table in the back?" James asked, motioning toward a booth near the window. Lily nodded, smiling politely at a couple who offered curious stares. As they slid into the booth, she glanced around, almost as if taking mental notes of the old framed photographs lining the walls. The faded black and white shots of the town back in its heyday. The signed baseball jerseys, the yellowing newspaper clippings. "I like places like this," she said finally, resting her hands on the table. "There's something honest about them." James couldn't help but smile faintly. Honest is one word for it, predictable's another. A waitress named Carol, someone James had known for decades, appeared with a notepad, eyes flicking between him and Lily with barely concealed curiosity. "Evening, James. Haven't seen you in a while," James nodded. "Hey, Carol, I'll take the usual." Carol turned to Lily expectantly. "I'll have the same, whatever it is," Lily said with a soft laugh, causing Carol's eyebrows to lift slightly before she jotted down the order and walked away. Once she was gone, James leaned back, arms crossed loosely. "You sure you're up for diner food?" "Probably not what you're used to," Lily shook her head. "Trust me, it's a welcome change. I've spent the last week eating overpriced room service and bland airport meals. This feels real." For a moment, silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Outside, the evening sun dipped lower, casting soft amber light through the window, catching in Lily's hair as she absent-mindedly traced the rim of her glass. James cleared his throat. "So, what brings someone like you through a town like ours?" Her smile faded slightly, and she glanced out the window as if debating how much to reveal. "Business trip," she said finally. "I've been on the road for days, hopping from meeting to meeting. My company's been expanding into smaller markets." James nodded but didn't press. He recognized that distant tone, polished words masking something unsaid. Instead, he took a sip of water and waited, and Lily glanced back at him, as if sensing his patience. "Truth is," she added, voice softer, "it's been a rough stretch lately. Not just business, personal too." Her eyes met his, and James saw something there, a weariness that didn't come from long flights or corporate stress. It was something deeper, something he understood all too well. "I get it," he said simply. She tilted her head slightly, curiosity flickering. "You do?" He nodded. "Lost my wife 5 years ago, Margaret. Cancer took her faster than we could catch our breath." The words came out matter of fact, but they carried the weight of every quiet night since. For a moment, Lily didn't respond. Instead, she reached across the table, her fingers gently brushing his hand. A small gesture, but sincere. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "That must have been impossible." James swallowed, feeling the familiar tightness in his chest, but somehow her words didn't sting. Instead, they settled like a soft weight, grounding him. Carol returned, with 2 plates, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, and refilled their coffee cups without a word. Once she left, Lily studied her plate, then glanced back up at him with a half-smile. "This is probably better than anything I've eaten all week," she said, cutting into her meal. James chuckled. "Told you it's nothing fancy." They ate, in comfortable silence for a while, the hum of conversation and the clatter of utensils filling the space. Finally, Lily set down her fork, her gaze meeting his again. "You're the first person who's asked why I'm here without making assumptions," she said softly. "Everyone I meet usually has a story they want to attach to me. Successful woman, fancy car, must have it all figured out." James met her eyes steadily. "I've learned not to judge a person by what they drive." She smiled genuinely, leaning back in the booth. "And what about you, James Walker? Always been here, fixing engines, letting people pass through?" He considered her question carefully before answering. "Town's small, but it's enough. Things break, I fix them. Gives me something to do." But even as he said it, James felt the quiet truth settle in. For years, he'd been patching things up, cars, memories, routines, but not himself. Lily seemed to sense it too. She didn't push, didn't prod. Instead, she reached for her coffee, holding it with both hands. "Well," she said lightly, "thank you for fixing more than just my car tonight." James looked at her, the corners of his mouth tugging upward. "Maybe I just needed a reason." Outside, dusk had fully settled, the streetlights flickering on. Neither of them seemed in a hurry to leave. For the first time in a long while, James found himself wondering what might happen if he didn't let this be just another evening that passed him by. The diner's neon sign flickered faintly in the darkness as James walked Lily to her car. The evening air had turned cooler, crisp, with the quiet hum of a town that never stayed awake past 9. Crickets chirped faintly, and somewhere down the road, a dog barked once before settling into silence. Lily leaned against her car, arms folded casually, but her expression thoughtful. She looked up at the stars. A clear canvas stretched endlessly above them, unobstructed by city lights. For a long moment, neither spoke. "Thank you again for dinner," James finally said, sliding his hands into his pockets. He wasn't sure why he felt the need to say it. Maybe because tonight felt different. He couldn't quite put a name to it. Lily smiled softly. "Thank you for fixing my car, and for not asking too many questions." James glanced at her, one eyebrow raising. "Slightly. Sometimes it's better to let people offer what they're ready to." Her smile faltered just a little, as if those words unlocked something beneath the surface. She hesitated, then looked down, fiddling absently with the edge of her sleeve. "My father used to say that," she murmured, "that people talk when they're ready, not when you press them." James didn't reply immediately. He waited, letting the silence stretch without pressure. "I wasn't always like this," Lily continued after a moment, voice low but steady. "Running from meeting to meeting, flying city to city. There was a time I thought I had it all figured out, career mapped, personal life tidy." Her eyes drifted back to him, searching, as if gauging how much she dared to reveal. "But life Doesn't exactly stick to plans, she added with a small laugh. A year ago, I called off an engagement. The man I thought I'd spend forever with turned out he was more in love with my resume than me. James felt something tighten in his chest, not pity, but recognition. That ache of realizing the foundation you'd built your life on wasn't as solid as you believed. I'm sorry, he said quietly, meaning it. She shook her head. No need. Better to know before it's too late. For a brief second, she looked, almost fragile, her carefully composed exterior slipping just enough to reveal the cracks beneath. It wasn't something James was used to seeing, not from someone like her, someone who carried themselves like they had nothing left to prove. And before he could stop himself, he spoke. I used to think that too, he said, that if you worked hard enough, followed the steps, life would reward you for it. She turned toward him, listening. My wife, Margaret, she was the one with the plans, always making sure things fit together, and when she got sick... He paused, the words thick on his tongue. It felt like everything unraveled at once. James stared down at his hands, still stained faintly with oil despite his earlier efforts to scrub them clean. After she passed, I kept the shop going, something familiar, something I could control. Lily's gaze softened, and without hesitation she stepped forward, closing the space between them. It's strange, she said gently, how we keep ourselves busy patching things up, just so we don't have to look at the parts we can't fix. James met her eyes, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, two people, both carrying invisible scars, finding an odd kind of solace in the quiet understanding between them. Before either could speak again, a sudden gust of wind rustled through the trees nearby, carrying with it the scent of fresh rain and something unspoken. Lily glanced at the sky. Looks like it might storm, she said, glancing at her watch. I should probably get going before I get caught in it. James nodded, though part of him wished the evening didn't have to end so soon. As she moved to open her car door, she paused, then looked back at him. I'm around for another day or two, she said lightly, though there was something tentative beneath her words. Maybe tomorrow? You could show me more of this town of yours? The offer hung in the air, unexpected yet natural. James rubbed the back of his neck, a small smile tugging at his lips. Not much to see, but sure, I'd like that. Her smile widened, warmer this time. Good. It's a date then. She slid into the driver's seat, the engine purring to life, headlights cutting softly through the night. James stood there, watching as her car disappeared down the quiet street, the taillights glowing like distant embers. Only when the darkness settled fully around him did he realize he was still smiling. He hadn't expected this, hadn't planned for someone like Lily to cross his path and stir something long dormant inside him. But life, he thought as he walked back toward his truck, had a funny way of surprising you when you least expected it. And maybe, just maybe, some things weren't meant to be fixed, but rediscovered. The morning sun spilled over the horizon like a soft watercolor, casting long shadows across Main Street. It was the kind of quiet morning James had always appreciated. Simple, predictable. The town stirred slowly, a few locals sweeping storefronts. The faint sound of a bell as the bakery opened its doors. James leaned against his truck outside Marcy's diner, arms folded loosely as he scanned the street. He'd arrived early, telling himself it was habit, but the truth gnawed at him. He was nervous. It had been years since he'd met anyone new, let alone agreed to spend more time with them. Most days his interactions were brief, a nod at the hardware store, small talk at the gas station. Nothing lingered, but today felt different. A sleek black car rounded the corner and parked neatly by the curb. Lily stepped out, sunglasses perched atop her head, casual, yet effortlessly elegant. She smiled when she spotted him, and something in James's chest tightened in a way that both startled and steadied him. "Morning," she greeted, walking up to him. "Hope I'm not late." James shook his head. "You're right on time." They exchanged a comfortable smile before heading inside the diner. The familiar chime of the bell announced their arrival, and once again, the hum of conversation dipped. As patrons glanced their way, Carol, the waitress, gave James a knowing look from behind the counter, but said nothing as she handed them menus and led them to a corner booth. Lily glanced around, her eyes lingering on the same photographs she'd noticed the night before, the black and white images of the town, the faded signs of history etched into every corner. "This place has character," she remarked, settling into the booth. "I imagine not much has changed over the years." James smiled faintly. "That's the charm. People around here like things the way they've always been." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "There's something comforting about that." Carol reappeared, pen poised. "Same as last night, James." He nodded. "Yeah, and coffee." Carol turned to Lily. "And for you, hun?" Lily handed her menu back. "I'll try the pancakes, and coffee, black." Once Carol retreated, Lily leaned her elbows on the table, eyes studying James with quiet interest. "You grew up here?" she asked. He nodded. "Born and raised. My folks owned a little hardware store down the street. I started working on engines. When I was about 15, never saw much reason to leave." Lily smiled gently. "There's something admirable about that, knowing where you belong." James shrugged. "Maybe, or maybe I just never figured out where else to go." Her gaze lingered on him, thoughtful. Sometimes staying put takes more courage than leaving. He met her eyes briefly before looking away, unsure how to respond. Before he could gather his thoughts, a voice from across the diner broke through. "Hey, James." It was Pete Miller, one of the local farmers, waving from a table near the window. "Who's the fancy lady?" A few heads turned, curious, and James felt his ears burn. He shot Pete a look, but kept his voice light. "A friend passing through." Lily chuckled softly, leaning back. "Seems like word travels fast around here." James rolled his eyes. "Small towns. Everyone's business is everyone's business." She smiled, clearly unbothered. "I don't mind. It's refreshing, actually. Where I live, people barely look up from their phones, let alone ask questions." Carol returned with steaming plates of food and refilled their coffees. They ate quietly for a while, the clatter of dishes and soft conversations creating a comforting backdrop. Halfway through her pancakes, Lily set her fork down and glanced at James thoughtfully. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she asked, voice casual but curious. James considered the question, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "Sometimes," he admitted. "After Margaret passed, there were nights I thought about packing up, trying somewhere new. But in the end, this town, it's what I know. People here, they knew her, knew us. There's something grounding about that." Lily nodded, her expression softening. "I understand. Familiar places can feel like anchors when everything else changes." He watched her for a moment, noting how easily she listened, how she didn't fill the space with meaningless chatter. It struck him how rare that was. "And you," he asked, "always moving, new cities, big deals. Doesn't it wear on you?" Lily smiled wistfully. "Lately, yes. It used to excite me, the constant motion, but lately I've been wondering what it'd be like to slow down." Her words lingered in the air, unspoken implications hanging between them. Before James could respond, Pete passed by their table on his way out, offering Lily a friendly tip of his hat. "Don't let him fool you, miss. James here's the best mechanic and the town's most eligible bachelor." Lily laughed, her eyes sparkling. James shook his head, feigning exasperation. "Ignore him." But as Pete exited, James noticed the way Lily's smile lingered, not forced, not polite, genuine. The check came, but Lily reached for it first. "My treat," she said firmly. "You already fixed my car." James hesitated but relented with a nod. As they stepped outside, the morning had warmed, sunlight stretching across the sidewalk. For a moment they stood there, neither in a rush to leave. "I was thinking," Lily began, her voice light, "if you're not busy later, maybe you could show me more of this town, the parts not on a map." James glanced at her, caught off guard by how natural the invitation felt. He gave a small nod, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Yeah, I think I could do that." And as they walked down the quiet street together, something in James shifted, subtle but undeniable. Maybe, he thought, familiar places could feel new again under the right circumstances. James stood in front of his garage, arms crossed, staring at the faded paint on the shop sign. The morning air smelled like fresh dew, mixed with the familiar tang of oil and steel. A breeze rustled through the sycamores lining the street, but James barely noticed. His thoughts were heavier than usual. The letter from the property owner still sat folded in his jacket pocket. He'd read it 3 times already, the words seared into his mind. Due to rising property costs, monthly rent for Walker Auto Repair will increase by 30% effective next month. 30%. It might as well have been triple. He exhaled slowly, glancing at the garage bay where an old pickup waited to be serviced. For years, he'd kept the place afloat, never wealthy, but steady, enough to get by. But times had changed. Fewer people drove down this stretch of town. Some younger folks drove out to the big box service centers off the highway, and now the rent increase? It felt like one more weight pressing down. He wiped his hands on his jeans and walked inside, forcing himself to focus. There was always something to fix, hoses to replace, engines to tune. It was how he kept the world manageable. But the weight clung to him stubborn. By late afternoon, the sun had climbed high and sweat dampened his shirt. He didn't notice Lily's car pull up until the shadow fell across the shop's open bay. "Hey, stranger," she called lightly, stepping out of her convertible. James straightened, wiping his brow. "Hey, wasn't expecting you today." Lily approached, a paper bag in hand. "Brought you lunch. Figured you might forget to eat." He almost smiled, but something in his expression must have tipped her off. She studied him carefully as she handed over the bag. "Everything all right?" she asked. James hesitated, considering brushing it off. That was his habit, keep burdens to himself, deal with them quietly. But there was something about Lily's gaze, direct, unpretentious, that made evasion feel pointless. He sighed, leaning back against the hood of a Chevy. "Got some bad news about the shop." Her brow furrowed. "What kind of bad news?" He pulled the letter from his pocket, handing it to her without a word. She unfolded it, her eyes scanning quickly. When she looked up, there was no pity in her expression, just quiet understanding. "That's a big jump," she said softly. "Bigger than I can swing," James admitted. His voice came out rougher than intended, laced with frustration. "I've kept this place running 30 years. Now, all of a sudden, it's not enough." Lily folded the letter neatly, handing it back. For a moment, she seemed to weigh her words carefully. "Have you thought about negotiating?" she asked gently. James shook his head. "They're not interested. Some developers looking at the property. Guess they think they can get more out of it." The words tasted bitter. Losing the shop felt like losing more than a building. It felt like losing the last piece of stability he'd clung to after Margaret passed. Lily glanced around the garage. The worn tools, the handwritten signs, the Polaroid photos of customers, tacked to the bulletin board. "This place means something to a lot of people, James." He nodded but said nothing. She hesitated, then spoke carefully. "If there's anything I can do to help—" Before she could finish, James cut in, his tone firm. "I appreciate it, but I'll figure it out." Lily's eyes softened, but she didn't argue. Instead, she took a step back, giving him space. "I didn't mean to overstep," she said quietly. I know how hard it is to carry things alone." James exhaled slowly. the tension in his shoulders still coiled tight. "It's not about pride. It's just, this shop, I built it with my own hands. I've already lost enough. Don't want to lose the last thing I've got left." She nodded, understanding more than he said aloud. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was thick with unspoken truths neither was ready to name. After a moment, she smiled faintly. "All right, no pressure. But lunch is non-negotiable." James chuckled softly despite himself accepting. "The bag." "Fair enough." Lily lingered for another moment before glancing back at her car. "If you change your mind about anything, you know where to find me." She turned, the sound of her heels fading as she walked back toward the driver's side. James watched her go, torn between gratitude and stubbornness. As she drove off, he stood there, the letter crumpled in his fist, the weight on his chest a little heavier than before, not just because of the shop, but because of something else. It had been so long since anyone had cared enough to offer help, and he wasn't sure if he was ready to let someone in, knowing how easily life could pull the rug out from under you. But something told him Lily wasn't the kind to disappear easily. The following morning came and went without much fanfare. James kept busy, as he always did, wrench in hand, grease under his fingernails, mind focused on anything but the letter that still weighed down his pocket. The rhythmic clatter of tools, the low hum of engines, and the quiet solitude of the garage walls offered him refuge. But even routine couldn't stop his thoughts from drifting. He replayed yesterday's conversation with Lily in his mind more times than he cared to admit. The way she'd offered to help, not out of pity but genuine care, had left something unsettled in him. He respected her for not pressing, but the truth gnawed at him all the same. By late afternoon, James finally pulled himself away from the garage, locking up with a heaviness in his chest. He headed down Main Street, deciding a cup of coffee might clear his head. Marcy's diner buzzed with its usual crowd. Locals gathered at booths, swapping stories over steaming plates. Carol greeted him with her usual grin as he slid into a corner seat. "Haven't seen you much this week," she remarked, pouring him a fresh cup. "Been busy?" James replied, forcing a smile. Before she could comment further, the bell above the diner door chimed. He glanced up on instinct and froze. Lily stood there, talking quietly with a man in a suit. Something about the exchange seemed formal, businesslike. After a moment, she nodded, and the man handed her a folder before exiting. James watched her. He crossed the room toward him, a warm smile playing at her lips. "Didn't expect to find you here," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Figured I'd grab some coffee," he replied, voice neutral though his mind was still stuck on the earlier exchange. "Everything all right?" She nodded casually. "Just handling some things for work." He accepted the answer, though something inside him itched with curiosity. They chatted lightly, small talk about the town, her impressions, harmless observations, but James couldn't shake the nagging feeling in the back of his mind. As the conversation lulled, Carol returned, sliding the check onto the table. Before James could reach for it, Lily leaned over, swiftly tucking a crisp bill beneath the slip. "Lily," he began, but she cut him off with a grin. "Don't argue. My treat." Reluctantly, he relented. Once they stepped outside the afternoon. Sun filtered through the storefronts, casting soft shadows on the sidewalk. Lily turned to him, hands casually tucked into her coat pockets. "Busy tomorrow?" she asked lightly. James shook his head. "Just the usual." She smiled, her eyes kind but unreadable. "Maybe I'll stop by. I like seeing how things work." He gave a small nod, unsure of how to respond. There was something unspoken hovering between them, something neither of them seemed quite ready to name. After she left, James walked slowly back toward his truck, thoughts heavy once again. He couldn't explain it, but something felt off. Not in a bad way, necessarily, but like there was a shift happening beneath the surface. It wasn't until the next morning that the shift made itself known. James arrived at the shop early, as always. He moved through his routine without thought, rolling up the bay doors, checking inventory, flipping on the lights. But as he stepped outside to retrieve a part from the storage shed, something caught his eye, an envelope, taped neatly to the front door. He peeled it off carefully, brow furrowing as he opened it. Inside was a letter, short, direct, effective. Immediately, your rent increase has been rescinded. Terms remain as previously agreed. Thank you for your continued tenancy. There was no signature, no explanation. James stood there, the letter gripped tightly in his hands, staring at the words like they might rearrange themselves into something else. But there was only one conclusion that made sense. Lily. The pieces clicked into place. The man at the diner, the folder, the conversation she'd brushed off so casually. She hadn't asked his permission, hadn't waited for him to accept help. She'd simply handled it. He felt heat rise in his chest, a mixture of emotions swirling, gratitude, frustration, and something deeper, something harder to name. For the first time in a long while, James didn't head back inside immediately. Instead, he stood under the morning sky, letting the weight of it settle. By late afternoon, Lily's convertible pulled up outside the garage, as promised. She stepped out, waving lightly, but her smile faded slightly when she caught sight of his expression. "Hey," she greeted cautiously. "Everything all right?" James wiped his hands on a rag, walking toward her with measured steps. He didn't raise his voice. He rarely did. But there was a quiet intensity in his eyes. "You talked to the landlord," he said evenly. Lily's gaze didn't waver. "I did." For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. "I told you I'd figure it out," he said quietly. Her voice was calm, but there was something firm beneath it. "And I knew you would. But sometimes, James, people need a little help. It doesn't make you weaker." He exhaled, jaw tightening. "I've never been one to take handouts." "This wasn't a handout," she replied softly. "It was an investment in something worth keeping." James stared at her, the storm of emotions flickering behind his eyes. Pride, stubbornness, years of doing things on his own, but also the sharp awareness that no one had stood up for him like that in a long, long time. Finally, he ran a hand through his hair, letting out a slow breath. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Lily replied gently, her voice laced with something tender. "But maybe let someone stand beside you for once." The words hung between them, heavier than any argument. And for the first time in years, James felt something shift, something loosening its grip. He gave her a small nod, rough, around the edges but genuine. "All right," he murmured. "Maybe." Lily's smile returned, warm and understanding. She didn't press. She never did. But as she climbed back into her car and pulled away, James stood there a while longer, watching. The road, long after she'd disappeared. Something told him this wasn't just about the shop anymore. The air between them felt different. James noticed it the moment Lily walked into the garage the next day. She smiled as she always did, but there was a caution in her step, a softness in her gaze, as though she sensed a line had been drawn, and she wasn't sure she was allowed to cross. He wiped his hands on a rag, eyes steady but guarded. "Morning," she greeted lightly. "Morning," he replied, voice flat. For a moment neither said more. The usual ease between them had been replaced by something heavier, something unsaid. Lily glanced around, as if looking for something to anchor the conversation. "Busy today?" "Always something to fix," James muttered, turning back toward the half-disassembled engine in front of him. She lingered near the entrance, arms folded loosely, watching him work. Minutes passed, the clink of metal tools filling the silence. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter. "You're upset." James didn't look up. "You went behind my back, Lily." Her breath caught faintly, though she tried to mask it. "I wanted to help," He tightened a bolt with a bit more force than necessary, jaw set. "I didn't ask for help." The words hung between them, sharp edges cutting through the space like glass. Lily stepped closer, her tone calm but insistent. "James, I didn't do it to insult you. You were about to lose everything you worked for." He straightened slowly, finally meeting her gaze. His eyes held something fierce, something wounded beneath the surface. "I've been standing on my own 2 feet a long time," he said quietly. "I've lost things before. I could have handled it." Her lips parted, but he wasn't finished. "You might think it's just money, a gesture, but to me it's more. It's pride. It's knowing I can take care of myself." Lily exhaled, frustration flickering beneath her calm exterior. "And is standing alone worth losing what you've built, your shop, your life here?" James shook his head, wiping his hands clean, though they were already spotless. "It's not about the shop anymore," he muttered. "It's about what it means." Lily's gaze softened, her voice gentler now. "You think I don't understand that? James, I've built everything I have from scratch. I know what it feels like to watch something slip away. But sometimes, when you're holding on too tight, you miss the people trying to hold you up." Silence stretched between them, thick and taut. James stared past her, eyes distant. "I didn't need saving," Lily swallowed, visibly composing herself. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, but there was a faint crack beneath it. "I didn't come here to save you, James. I came here because being around you reminded me there's more to life than deals and deadlines. I thought maybe you'd see that too." She hesitated, waiting, hoping he'd soften, but James's shoulders remained rigid, his expression unreadable. After a long pause, Lily gave a small nod, almost imperceptible. "I should go," she said quietly, turning toward the door. "Take care of yourself." She walked away without looking back, the sound of her heels fading as she crossed the lot. James stood there, the garage suddenly too quiet, the weight in his chest heavier than before. He told himself it was for the best, easier this way. No debts, no one to owe. Safer to keep the walls up, to push away anyone who got too close. But as the hours passed and the sun dipped low, casting shadows across the shop floor, James realized something unsettling. The quiet he used to find comfort in now felt hollow. That night, he sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cold cup of coffee, staring at the folded letter Lily had left on the counter days ago. No signature. No expectation, just an act of kindness he hadn't been ready to accept. He glanced at the empty chair across from him, the one Margaret used to sit in, and let out a slow breath. It had been so long since he'd let anyone in. Too long, but maybe, he thought, shutting everyone out wasn't the same as standing strong. Maybe somewhere along the line he'd confused solitude with survival. The thought settled like a stone in his chest, unmoving. Sleep didn't come easily that night. By morning, the shop felt quieter than usual, the hours dragging. Customers came and went, polite nods exchanged, but James's mind wasn't on the work. It was on the woman who'd walked away, and whether or not she'd already decided. She wouldn't come back. The shop door chimed softly as James locked up for the night. The street outside was already empty, the hum of the town settling into its usual quiet rhythm. Main Street looked the same as it always had, lamplight casting warm pools on the pavement, shadows stretching long and familiar. Yet something about it felt different tonight, like the air itself held a weight he couldn't shake. He slid into his old pickup, the seat creaking beneath him, and drove without really thinking, the steering wheel steady beneath his calloused hands. His body moved by habit, but his mind wasn't on the road. Instead, it wandered to the woman he'd watched walk away days before. The memory of Lily's expression, steady, calm, but carrying something fragile underneath, lingered stubbornly. He kept replaying her words, the quiet ache behind them. She hadn't needed to stay. She didn't owe him anything. And yet she'd stayed longer than anyone had in years, and he'd pushed her away. By the time he pulled into his driveway, dusk had fully settled. His house stood as it always did, neat, still, empty. James cut the engine and sat there for a moment, staring at the porch light casting faint shadows on the front steps. When he finally walked inside, the silence swallowed him whole. The house smelled faintly of motor oil, old wood, and something else. Something faded with time. He tossed his keys onto the counter and moved toward the kitchen, opening the same cupboard, reaching for the same mug. Routine. Familiar. But as he stood there, pouring black coffee into a chipped cup, his eyes drifted toward the shelf above the table. The photo frames lined neatly, dusted regularly but untouched otherwise. One photo caught his attention, the one he hadn't dared to really look at in years. It was a candid shot. Margaret, standing beside him outside the garage, her hair pulled back, grease smudged on her cheek, grinning like she had the world figured out. Her arm looped through his, pulling him in close, like she always did. James swallowed hard, the memory sharp. She'd been the one who taught him how to love without conditions. She never cared if his hands were rough, if his words came few and far between. She saw something steady in him, something worth holding on to, and now, all these years later, Lily had done the same. Only this time he'd turned his back. He sat down heavily at the kitchen table, running a hand over his face. The ache in his chest had nothing to do with the shop or the money or the town's small gossip circle. It was about something deeper. The walls he'd built since Margaret died, walls meant to keep the world manageable, predictable. But those same walls had left him standing alone. James leaned back, eyes drifting to the ceiling, as if the answers might be written there. Margaret's voice echoed faintly in his memory. Something she'd said more than once, usually when he got stubborn and tried to take on too much. You don't have to carry everything alone, James. Sometimes letting someone in doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. He stared at the photograph for a long time, her smile almost urging him forward. By the next morning, James made up his mind. He wiped down the shop counters, tightened up the loose paperwork, and pulled out his old jacket, the one he rarely wore anymore. Around noon, he slid into his truck and headed out. Not toward any job, but toward the address Lily had once casually mentioned when describing her hotel stay. It was a 20-minute drive to the city limits, just far enough from the comfortable borders of his world. As the miles rolled by, James felt something in him unravel, a tension he hadn't realized he'd been holding. When he reached the hotel, he parked and sat still for a moment, fingers tapping the steering wheel. Doubts crept in. What if she'd already left? What if she didn't want to see him? But he knew he had to try. Inside the lobby, he scanned for her, heart thudding heavier than he liked to admit. Finally, he spotted her near the window, reading something on her phone, her brow furrowed in quiet concentration. He cleared his throat lightly as he approached. "Lily!" She looked up, startled, her eyes widening slightly. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she set her phone down slowly, her expression unreadable. "James," he nodded, hands shoved in his jacket pockets. "Can I sit?" She gestured to the chair across from her, though there was a faint wariness in her gaze. He sat, exhaling slowly before speaking. "I owe you an apology." Her eyes softened, just slightly, but she stayed silent, waiting. "I've spent a lot of years thinking I had to handle everything myself," he continued. "After Margaret, it felt safer that way. But you've shown me something different." He glanced down at his hands, rough and stained with the marks of years spent fixing things. "Pushing you away. It wasn't about you. It was about me, not knowing how to let someone in without feeling like I'd lose myself." Lily's lips pressed together, her fingers lacing gently. "You don't have to explain, James." I understand more than you think. He shook his head. No, you deserve. Better than me leaving things unsaid. Silence stretched again, but this time it felt less heavy. Finally, he met her eyes. I don't want to keep standing alone. Not if there's another way. For a heartbeat, she said nothing, just watching him like she was trying to decide. If he truly meant it, then slowly, her mouth curved into a small, genuine smile. I was wondering when you'd catch up, she said softly. James let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Something in his chest lightened. Still time to show me around your town, she asked gently. His answering smile came easier this time. Yeah, he said quietly. There's still time. The crisp morning air carried with it a sense of renewal. James stood outside his garage, leaning against the doorway, coffee in hand. The sky above was painted soft blue, the town just beginning to stir. It was quiet, peaceful almost, but something inside him buzzed with anticipation. For the first time in years, it wasn't the usual routine that occupied his thoughts. It wasn't bills or parts or the hum of engines needing repair. It was Lily. They hadn't spoken much after yesterday's conversation, just enough to bridge the distance, enough to leave the door open. But the unspoken understanding between them felt stronger than anything words could have offered. As if on cue, a familiar car rolled up the street. Lily's convertible pulled into the lot, sunlight glinting off the polished exterior. She stepped, out casual yet composed, a quiet smile lighting up her face when she spotted him. Morning, she greeted, walking toward him. Morning, James replied, setting his coffee aside. Wasn't expecting you so early, she shrugged, the faintest hint of playfulness in her eyes. Didn't want to waste the day. For a moment they stood in easy silence, the weight of previous tensions having faded, leaving something lighter in its place. I've been thinking, Lily began, her voice measured but thoughtful, about what you said yesterday. James glanced at her, waiting. She continued, glancing around the garage, the peeling paint, the worn floors, the signs of years well lived but weathered. You've built something solid here. But I think it could be more. James raised an eyebrow, curiosity flickering. More? Lily met his gaze, her tone earnest. You've got the skills, the reputation. People trust you. But what if we took this place and made it something bigger? Something that could last beyond just today or tomorrow? He studied her carefully, unsure where she was heading, but intrigued despite himself. I've been wanting to step back from my usual pace, she admitted. Get involved in something real, something grounded. She hesitated, then added softly, and maybe do it with someone who knows what that means. James swallowed, understanding slowly dawning. You're talking about a partnership, he said, voice low. She smiled faintly. I'm talking about investing in something worth believing in. Not just money, time, effort, building something together. The words settled between them, like a carefully laid brick, sturdy and intentional. James looked around his garage, the place he'd poured decades of sweat and hours into. It wasn't perfect, but it had always been his. The thought of sharing, that of letting someone else not just help but stand beside him, it was something he hadn't let himself imagine before. But now, he exhaled slowly, feeling something inside him loosen. I never thought I'd want anyone meddling with this place, he admitted. But I don't think that's what you're offering. Lily shook her head gently. I'm offering to stand. Next to you, not in front of you. James gave a small smile, something genuine flickering across his face. Well, in that case, maybe it's time this shop saw something new. She grinned, the tension in her shoulders easing. Good, because I have some ideas. They spent the next few hours sketching plans, nothing official, nothing binding, just loose thoughts on scrap paper and napkins, ideas about expanding services, updating equipment, maybe adding a small community corner where locals could gather while waiting for repairs. James found himself surprisingly open, seeing the old shop through fresh eyes. It wasn't about losing control. It was about evolving. At one point, Lily looked up from the table strewn with notes. "You know," she said quietly, "I didn't realize how much I missed being part of something real." James met her gaze, recognizing the same longing in himself. "That makes two of us," he replied simply, as the afternoon sun dipped lower, casting golden light through the windows. They stood side by side at the garage entrance, looking out over the quiet street. "Feels different now," Lily murmured. James nodded. "It does." After a pause, she glanced at him, her smile softer. "You sure about this? About letting me in?" He didn't hesitate. "Yeah," he said. "I'm sure." Because it wasn't just about saving the shop anymore. It was about rebuilding something far more important, the part of himself he thought had been lost for good. And with Lily standing beside him, it felt like the foundation was finally strong enough to hold. The morning of the grand reopening arrived brighter than James expected. The sky stretched clear and endless over the town, sunlight gleaming off the polished windows of Walker Auto Repair. The freshly painted sign above the garage bore not only his name, but a new addition beneath it. & Co. Simple, unassuming, but it meant more than James could have ever put into words. The lot buzzed with familiar faces, locals who'd been bringing their cars to James for years, old friends, new ones, even a few who'd heard whispers of the shop's transformation and had come out of curiosity. Banners fluttered gently in the breeze, and tables were set up with coffee, pastries, and little paper napkins printed with the shop's logo. James stood off to the side, hands in his pockets, watching it all unfold. It felt surreal. This place. He'd kept running on grit, and habit now had new life breathed into it. And right there, moving between the crowd, was Lily. She greeted people with ease, her laughter light and genuine, no trace of the guarded businesswoman she'd once had to be. She wore jeans and a simple shirt today, her hair tied back, sleeves rolled up, comfortable, at home. When her eyes met his across the lot, she smiled, a smile that reached all the way to her eyes. James felt something shift inside him, not a grand revelation, but a quiet certainty. This was exactly where he wanted to be. Carol approached him, carrying a plate of donuts, her grin wide. "Well, would you look at this place?" she teased. "I hardly recognize it." James chuckled, shaking his head. "Didn't know we had it in us, did you?" Carol winked. "Never doubted the hands behind it." As she walked off, Pete Miller sidled up next. "You sure you ain't running for mayor next?" he joked, nodding toward the crowd. James smiled, but his gaze drifted back to Lily, who was now chatting with a group of teenagers, admiring one of the restored classic cars parked out front. Pete followed his line of sight and gave a knowing nudge. "Looks like you've got more than just the shop fixed up." James didn't deny it. Later, when most of the crowd had filtered out and only a few regulars lingered by the coffee table, Lily walked up beside him, brushing her hand lightly against his. "You okay?" she asked softly. He glanced at her, eyes crinkling with something close to wonder. Better than okay. They stood in comfortable silence, surveying the garage, the new tools neatly arranged, the lounge area they'd added with mismatched chairs, a rack of magazines, even a corkboard, where customers had started pinning photos. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't big city polished, but it was theirs. James took a slow breath, the weight he'd carried for so long now feeling lighter, like it had finally been lifted, not by grand gestures, but by steady, quiet moments, like this. Turning to Lily, he cleared his throat. "I never said thank you." She gave him a sidelong glance, brow raised. "For what?" "For not giving up on me," he said simply. Her smile softened. "Wasn't planning on it." He hesitated. then reached into his back pocket, pulling out something small, an old, worn photo. He unfolded it carefully, revealing a younger version of himself and Margaret, standing in front of the shop, arms slung around each other. "I kept thinking about this," he admitted, "about how for years I believed this was all I had left." Lily looked at the photo, her expression gentle. "But lately," he continued, voice quieter, "I realized life doesn't stop after loss. It just changes shape." He folded the photo back up, tucking it safely away. "Turns out," he said, eyes meeting hers, "you were exactly what I didn't know I needed." Lily didn't respond immediately, but when she spoke, her voice was steady. "I think we both found something we weren't expecting." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of motor oil and fresh coffee, blending with the sound of laughter drifting from down the street. James reached out, taking her hand openly this time. Neither of them needed grand promises or declarations. The simplicity of standing side by side, knowing they'd weathered storms and still chose each other, that was enough. As the afternoon sun warmed their faces, James glanced around at the shop, the town, the woman beside him, and for the first time in a long, long while, he realized he wasn't just fixing broken things anymore. He was building something new, something worth keeping, something that would last. And that's the end of our story. But before you go, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments below. It always amazes me how stories like this can connect people from all over the world. If this story touched you, if it left you with something warm to hold on to, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the heartfelt stories I share here. And truly, thank you so much for spending your time with me today. It means more than you know. Until next time, take care and keep believing in love.